I'm John Willis. This is, we're going to talk about evaluations. I happen to think, sort of, like I do things each year. I think, like, what do I really want to focus on next year? And last year it was RAG. Still focused on. I ran the workshop. Some of you were in the workshop yesterday. I really think evaluations are going to be one of the more important, at least if you have an enterprise focus. So all things open AI, not open AI, but all things open space AI. All right, so what we're going to talk about, I'm going to do a little introduction of who I am. Talk about the cost of neglecting evaluations, right? And then we'll sort of separate out some of the research, and then like the real stuff, the quantitative, qualitative parts of this thing, the computational stuff, the human stuff. We'll talk a little about benchmarking, because underpinning all of this stuff is benchmarks. If we have time, ethical considerations. I think like there's sort of levels of ethics. There's sort of the world human ethics. There's the corporate ethics. There's the, and then some of the challenges. I'll just start with the beginning, that evaluations are necessary, but they can be incredibly costly because they are inference. I have one customer that currently now is spending more money on evaluations than they are for the inferences for the copilots that they write. All right, so that's me real quickly. I won't waste too much time. I've written a lot of books. If you want to look at my books, DevOps Handbook is probably the most one. You can go there, and it's my author portal. The book I'm most proud of, until like another month from now, is a book about one of the most famous industrial engineers who literally you can tie directly to Agile, Lean, and DevOps. I've done a lot of things. Got about 12 startups in there somewhere. A lot of them like massive failures, disasters. Like, my son's in here somewhere. We have to move into the basement of my brother-in-law's house. So ask him about it. He was a little young when that happened. But I've had some successes. I sold a company to Dell. I sold a company to Docker. I was on an executive team at Red Hat. Currently, I do consulting for MongoDB and their vector database. I do have a newsletter. And I think this is important because one of the things, I'm an infrastructure and operations person, been my whole life. We would say in the DevOps, I'm the OPS part of DevOps. But I worry a lot about like what new technologies do to infrastructure and how do we support it. And I'm very concerned. I'm not here to tell you to stop. No way. I'm telling you that, dear CIO, you better be prepared for the technical debt tsunami that is coming down the pike. And so we need to sort of deal with this now as opposed to later. And by the way, I've written a new book. It's a history of AI, Rebels of Reason. I'm pretty proud of this. And I'm giving away preview copies at noon today around the corner. So, I don't know how many people are going to want the book. We have like 225, so you might want to get there a little early if you want the book. And I'll be signing them too, so anyway. All right, so I saw this. I like the engineers over at Arise. In all transparency, I did do some consulting work for them. I don't do right now. There's a really good article, Why AI Engineers Need a Unified Tool for AI Evaluation and Observability. And I thought that was sort of an interesting, it's sort of, but it's a good kind of starter. I couldn't really find a great quote, but that was good enough. But like, the thing that I think about a lot, and I get into clients, and I have a course that I've built called Test-Driven Development for AI. How do you like that? Hey? And the point of the course is it came to me because I was teaching a class on RAG, and one of the students in there went back to their corporation, large manufacturing company, and said, hey, you ought to bring this guy in to help teach our developers, because it was actually a course around DevOps and Gen AI, right? Which, more about like if you're a DevOps person, like maybe hearing a DevOps person explain to you how AI works might be better than somebody who's been doing sort of ML for 30 or 5,000 years. And right, and it sort of worked. But like the thing they wanted, which was they were pretty mature in building their infrastructure around AI. They made a lot of choices. They had a team of about 30 that really were actually won some awards. What they wanted us to do is they had like 5,000 Java developers that really didn't, this was like foreign, everything foreign. And so the whole idea was, to teach the people who had been, like memory muscle on this notion that what we deliver and develop is deterministic. And for complexity theory people, it isn't, but like, we won't bring them into the conversation. But in their mind is you write a test, you run the code, and then it passes, fails. And I know there's fuzzy logic in DevOps pipelines, but like in general, it's pass, fail. And by the way, if I did it this time, the assumption is it's going to work that way 1 billion times. Well, in this world, it is like, no. You know, the most simplest question you can ask 5 times. Some people saw this in the RAG workshop yesterday. Like, even when you sort of set the temperature to a point where it said it should be deterministic, it still wasn't deterministic every time. You don't get the same answer for the same question, right? So, you know, if you're dealing with how do you train people, before you just tell them to go off and write code and write a chatbot, you need to basically help them understand this is a different world. You know, so, you know, again, things, you know, like, you have to embrace uncertainty. We've been saying this in the DevOps and the complexity theory people are part of DevOps for a long time, but now you better listen. You know, I said to a lot of the students in this, I trained like 300 developers, and I said, you know, you used to be able to say, I'll get to test-driven development next year, right? Like, you know, and I go into organizations where 40% of people still aren't doing TDD. Now, you can argue whether TDD is a good or bad thing, but that's somebody else's debate. But the point being is that now you do not have a choice. This is a brand problem. This is, you could go out of business. Right? So brand integrity, like you are chased with whatever you do. You know, you used to be in a bank, I'm going to run out of time. You used to be in a bank, yeah, I do this, I'm like, yeah, you know, I had it all scripted, but now I think about something. You know, it used to be in a bank, there were a group of people that were involved with funds. And that stuff was like rock solid bank. And you knew that like the reason why a bank puts so much infrastructure around sort of funds, right, because it's your money, is because that's the stuff that could literally have, you know, the sort of, you know, the OCC take your license away from a bank. But now, and that might have been 300 people. Now you have basically maybe 30,000 people where you could lose your license, a banking license, right? Like, it's a new world. You know, why evaluate LLMs? I mean, I think that, you know, like, again, like this should be obvious. It's like the, like we are like, you know, the proliferation of people developing sort of tools around these generative solutions, you know, like is nonstop. And you get CEOs saying do or die. You are like, you know, but boss, no, yeah, sorry, do it. And by the way, the CEOs were not really involved in some of the earlier technology discussions. Even cloud, like, yeah, that cloud thing, you know, just tell me when it goes wrong. They are sitting in asking questions to CIOs like, why aren't we doing this right now? What else did I miss? You know, all right, here, like, all right. That one right there. Buyer beware. You know, like, right now everybody's telling everybody to prototype the hell out of stuff. And nobody's thinking about what it's going to look like, or will it be in production? Is this production? We're not using the software development life cycles, all the things we've learned. You know, the cost of neglect, right? Like, there are, every vulnerability that has existed forever is not only a vulnerability in this new world, but it is compounded at scales, probably my napkin math, 2.5 orders of magnitude. You know, I put out LinkedIn like these pound dear CIO things, and I find them, like there was one this morning about how many RSA certificates are out there in the wild. That's an AI problem. Like and by the way, not only do we have 2.5 orders of magnitude of the things we already existed, which by the way, we weren't great at a lot of shit, right? Just the dependency map of most of our software. But now we got all this new stuff added to that. So we, you know, dear CIO, like we really, like we got to figure this out sooner than later, and the answer is no is not an answer. You know, I think I got first use on Shadow AI. You know, for those of you who've been around for cloud, you know, you had the Shadow IT, wasted inefficiencies. I mean, we can get into, I won't do here, but like the GPU starving, People are building architectures and they don't even know what they're going to do. They don't know the difference between inference and training. And like, you need to think about your infrastructure based on which you're going to do more of. And then reputational damage. So I wrote an article recently, in preparation here. It's called Evaluation Tools in Critical Operations ASI. So I want to hit the auditors. Sorry. I know that sort of the general consensus is don't teach the auditors things they don't need to know right now. Sorry. I think we need to get the auditors to start asking questions like, why did we get this answer? Because it's going to happen if it hadn't already happened to you. An auditor's going to go down a list, there's going to be some log, and they're going to randomly pick one, and they're going to say, why did your chatbot answer this way? And you're going to go, well, it's AI. Like, no. Yeah, like, that's not a good answer. And you are going to have to explain it. And the explanation is, well, that's what ChatGPT does. No, sorry. And because if the auditors know about evaluations, and they know about guardrails, and they know about all these things, so like, how many people heard the Air Canada story? Not that many. That's interesting. All right, this is a great story, right? I mean, not for Air Canada, but hey. So Air Canada, the interesting story was they were cleverly built a chatbot. They scraped everything. Now, this is secondhand counterfactual because they're not going to disclose the actual postmortem, but they built a RAG, and in the RAG they scraped some FAQs. So some young man whose mother died went out to the RAG and asked if he could get a refund if he flew back for his mother's funeral. Bought the ticket, called back up, tried to get his refund, and they said, oh, no, that's the chatbot. Like, no, but, and it wound up in Canada courts for like 2 years. Bad timing for like Air Canada, because everybody's like scared to death of AI doing these kind of things. So that you can't, I can napkin math calculate the brand reputation damage. It was probably, again, this is my napkin math, $500 million. Ultimately, they paid out less than $1,000 in the suit, but lost $500 million. So don't be in Air Canada, because some FAQ had the wrong answer. And then, like, if that's not the sort of the core primitive of why you need evaluations. And then one last thing, this is sort of interesting too, is, oh shit, 12 minutes, wow. I would read this paper, because Google figured this shit out 10 years ago. They had a scale of this type of problem. Not exactly all the same problems, but it's like, how do you deal with systemic challenges? That paper is like, it's very technical, but you don't have to be a mathematician to understand it. So what are evaluations? At a high level, we're looking for things like diversity, ground truth, answer relevance, correctness, hallucinations. We can actually measure hallucinations. I can basically say, some people I can't use AI because it hallucinates. Well, okay, humans hallucinate too, by the way. But I can say for this service, because I put it through a supply chain, I DevOpsed it, it should never be more than like 2% or 3%. Toxicity, right? Like all these things. Like these tools can do this. And it's a combination of stuff we'll talk about. This is kind of a cool slide. You can take it later. But what are we looking for? In the quantitative metrics, so the idea is sort of quantitative and qualitative, right? That's for everything, measurement. And so we're looking for accuracy, precision, and recall, right? But we're also looking for like the basic stuff like latency, token talk. Like those are important too. But like also now we add sort of another layer of some evaluation that is related to AI. How often do you get the similar results from the last time? So this is a really interesting, I talked about the RAG. I would literally, this is documentation for the guy who wrote the chatbot for MongoDB's documentation. And it's like about 10 pages. And here's the thing. The chatbot that he wrote probably took a couple of weeks. The evaluation construct, or the infrastructure about evaluated, probably was 3 months. And here's the thing, right? You're like, it's documentation. Why? Well, because when they turned it on, and if somebody wrote, hey, how do I go ahead and change the blah, blah, blah of a database? And it accidentally gave you the command to delete the database. Like the carnage of that for everybody involved. So they knew that up front. So they literally, red teaming, it's a great tutorial when the answer to a question matters. There's some of the scores. It's in the deck. I would encourage you to sort of look up these. So it's the first thing you wind up seeing people do. I do with customers, and they're told, hey, we got an enterprise license with Galileo, and make sure your F1 score is this. And I'm like, okay. What the heck does that mean? And you work in like even when I first went in, I was doing stuff like, yeah, they tell you best practices to not have more than this and this and this. Finally, I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I'm going to figure out what this stuff actually means. And by the way, things like Claude and ChatGPT are really good at explaining that stuff. So there's sort of the score. Score is about precision and recall, and it's some sort of geometric mean of. It gets crazy mathematics, but not too hard. It's just averages. But it's averages of how consistent, versus the sort of word consistency. The Blue Rogue is a little bit more task-oriented, and then Perplexity is sort of like how surprised you are. So on the F1, just quickly, it is really, if you think about the predictive nature. So a lot of the evaluation is you are basically going to set some form of ground truth. Ground truth in general is questions and answers about some corpus of information. And your prediction, this is how well you did on your predictions of how many true positives, false negatives, true negatives. And it's just a sort of reasonably not too complex, 8th grade math maybe 10th grade math, I don't know, to give you some sort of sense of how well it's doing sort of recall and precision. And Rogue and Blue are more what they call lexical similarity. These are more like similarity scores. So here's an example. And this is cool. Again, I just sort of ran I asked ChatGPT to build me because the products have this built into, right, all the solutions. But I just wanted to see how it worked, just basically a Rogue score. And it's what they call n-gram. This comes from the NLP stuff, right? In other words, how, and I won't get too much into it, but Rogue 1 would be how many words match. Rogue 2 might be how many pairs of words match. And then there's sort of a scoring for, again, I got ground truth and I got answer. So you add a lot of this stuff into the primordial soup of how you're going to try to not become an Air Canada. So this is the one everybody talks about, right? Oh, this sounds cool. It sounds funny. It's ridiculous. Well, LLM is a judge, right? It's just not that big of a deal, right? But it is in that, most of the. So now we're into the qualitative, right? So now, this is another new realm where we didn't do as much. And correct me, not now, but after the thing, if I got this wrong, I don't recall a lot of qualitative analysis of, traditional software development and testing, right? But we have to be here, right? And so one is literally have the LLMs evaluate stuff. And a lot of the out-of-the-boxes that, evaluation tools. And I would certainly start with an out-of-the-box. I would totally start with. And to be honest with you, right now, I don't get paid any money to say this. I think Arise is for me, there are unicorns in this world, there are horses. I'm a horse, right? So for a technical horse, it was the most easiest one for me to get started with underhand. And so you have the auto rater, which is sort of compared to a human rater, right? We'll talk about the human evaluations. So again, LLM as judges, it can get very complex, but you're likely taking some of the LLM. So you've got some prompt, you get some ground truth, customer does the prompt, they get the output, you compare the output to a judge, an LLM as a judge, to see how well did you do against the ground truth. So I'm at a corpus of data about employee hiring practices. I create maybe 500 cute question and answers that seem to be valid. Some of them are true positives, some are negatives. I run these evaluations, which uses another LLM to see how well I did. Bob's your uncle. Then the human doesn't go away. How do you like that? You have, it's got to be part of it, right? There's sort of gold standard. The human. I'll show you some examples of human interaction. Here's one. So I did this. I took Arise. I turned my latest book into the one that, if you get it, is the part 1, part 2, part 3 of a 7-part book. I put it into a RAG. I ran Arise. You can see it tells me things like precision, QA correctness, hallucination. But here's the human thing. This is really interesting. And I've got lots of examples of this in other courses. But the title of the book is, Rebels of Reason from Aristotle to blah, 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 right? And that sort of marketing gets involved. You really should say this, right? But it's true. It is sort of like how thinking, it's about humans' quest to create a machine that thinks. That's the underlying sub-narrative of my book, The History of AI. So it says that from its ground truth that it developed, or part of the process, it said that was a hallucination because I didn't talk about Aristotle. I didn't tell the reader who Aristotle was. I didn't need to do that. Right? So this is an example of that 10% hallucination is not a hallucination. Some people say ground truth can actually not be ground truth. Right? So again, this is why the human has to be involved in this. Because not all hallucinations, some hallucinations are hallucinations. And here I drill down, that's what I love about the explainability. A lot of them, all the sort of any reasonable evaluation tool will allow you to drill in. It will tell you why it thinks that, that was a hallucination. Well, thank you, but sorry. And then, this is something I did in my last book. After my last book, I started learning a lot more about this stuff. And I said, there's a whole strategy how you want to build your RAG. How do you chunk it? How do you do this? And I was thinking, all these blogs sort of say, well, you got to do it this way, that way. So I tried every sort of, should I use Markdown? Should I use this? And I had all the data. And I won't spend the time going into the video of yesterday's thing explains a lot more detail. But notice that column on the right? That was me evaluating the answer. And even if the best solution didn't have the best numbers, the best answer was what I read. I knew my book. If you read a book, by the way, you'll probably, before it actually goes onto Amazon, you've probably read it 30 times. Dimensionality reduction is a brilliant idea. Again, if you watched my presentation yesterday, the beauty of dimensional reduction is it's another way. This is sort of not really a core evaluation discussion, but in terms of a human, you load this data into these highly dimensional vector spaces. Right, 1,530. So think about a two-dimensional. X equals 7, Y equals 5. Now explode that to 1,536, where you have 1,536 floating point numbers saying where this word or this paragraph is. It's beyond a human comprehension. But there are these mathematical geniuses who figured out how to display those in two-dimension in categories that actually a human can understand. And you can look at the spatial relationships of things and find things that oh my God. That example right there, in my last book, it's a cluster of Toyota, about industrial engineer, and it had healthcare in there. There's nothing in my book about healthcare. Definitely not in my book related to Toyota and healthcare. And I circled in, I found the chunk, the paragraph, and it was about the early history of Toyota. It was a loom company, and some of the terminology, the LLMs interpreted as healthcare terminology. That's how you get a hallucination, by the way. So be able to sort of use another pane. Benchmarking is incredibly important. You need to understand benchmarking. Let's just put that as a placeholder for now. Do your research on benchmarking. It's important in so many ways, right? And it's just incredible amount of. These are some of the benchmarks. You'll get these. I think if you sort of through the open and all things open AI narrative to get somewhere here, you'll get a chance to get these slides. But this is interesting. This is note to anybody who wants to do a startup. I've done a lot of startups. I've advised a lot of startups. So literally Sunday, I saw some people, I totally respect their opinion, talk about this new model that is specifically designed just for evaluations. So a lot of people in evaluations will use a GPT 3.5, which I don't think is supported anymore, but a 4.0 mini as their evaluation. In other words, you want to use a different model than the model that you're using for inference. So you sort of GPT for Omni, maybe use GPT for Omni, and a lot of the baked-in sort of do their suggestions. Arise, Galileo, they'll have their suggestions. But their sort of general purpose. This is the first model where the purpose of this one is just evaluation. And some of the people I respect were pointing to this, saying there's a comparison how good it is for evaluations. So I signed up. By the way, the documentation was terrible, right? Which is not uncommon for a startup. I've done that. But I got an email from, a form letter email, thank you, John, for signing up. Is there anything we can do to help? 99% of the time, if you reply, you get no answer. This one I said, hey, I'm giving a presentation on Tuesday about evaluations. If you can give me some sample code that runs with ChromaDB and a sample document, blah, 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 I laid it out. And like last night, they sent me an example. This morning, I tried to test it. It worked. Because the concept of what they did, I'll show you, I think is really cool. One, it's a frontier evaluation. This is like maybe the new world. It supposedly ranks pretty high. I'm going to take their word for it for now. But like, the one thing I love that they have in the thing they do talk about in the documentation is I love stats. I love stats, you know, analytical statistics. I mean, this is something I'm a sort of novice hobbyist on it. But like the idea that they put the response back in a Likert scale, 1 through 5. Now I can add a whole body of statistical analysis on how good we're doing. Right? That's pretty ingenious, really. I hadn't seen this. And so I ran it, and this is the code they sent me. And it's pretty cool. Like it literally, you know, it's just a Gradio, very simple, but it's using their evaluator against corpus, like some earnings for a company, earnings statement or a shareholder statement. And but notice the outputs, they're putting it in Likert score quality. And that's based on what I scored there. I said score 1 is retrieved and completely unrelated, and a 5 is the patches are perfectly aligned with the query. Now I can do stats. So I need to do all the other stuff, but now over time I can just start saying, hey, CEO, like, we're not doing so good here. You may want to put a little bit brakes on. There are sort of different benchmarking approaches. You'll hear something called point-wise or pairwise. If you read the literature, I have links to really phenomenal. There's a paper by Google recently that came out this year that probably is the most comprehensive, you know, best paper I've read so far. It's sort of trying to explain all this. And you know, so the idea really is: do I take my prompt against one model inference, or do I sort of do a bake-off? Bias, right? Yeah, I mean, you know, like I think all of this, right? It's critical for stakeholders to understand how evaluation metric. This is another problem that we're having. Organizations basically are large companies are buying enterprise license with vendors who do evaluation. They're telling all the developers, you have to use evaluation. And they're saying, go for it. And they're like, okay, well, what is an NDCG? What is like F1? What is, I don't know, call the vendor. Or like, in other words, we're doing it backwards. Right? Well, like if you think about the cloud days, right? We told everybody to go out and do the cloud. They started putting data, and then we yelled at them, like, you can't put that data in the cloud. And then what happened? We stepped back and said, oh, well, you know, we probably should tell them what data they should or shouldn't put in the cloud. And a lot of organizations create data classification programs. So now when you said, well, what is the, oh, that data is like red, ain't going in the cloud. That data is green, sure. So we need to do the same thing. Instead of having the developers go through this whole process all over again, can we learn from our mistakes? Can we, as an organization, say, let's look at what you're trying to build. And let's put a classification. Is it a green? And green is like you're going to recommend where to go to lunch for remote employees who showed up at headquarters. You know, red, you know, you sort of like dark yellow, pretty close to red is the Air Canada story. Maybe red. By the way, purple is do not. Never. You know, and then there's all the in the middle. Like the yellow could be, yeah, it might not say something terrible, but it might just cause toil. Imagine it, you know, it's 80,000 employees. You've got some chatbot tool that tells people to take the third best choice. And at the end of the year, like, you know, we probably lost like $80 million last year because we literally consistently told people for this chatbot to do door number 3. Right? So, so again, we have to get ahead of this and not just expect our developers to figure out all this stuff is. Just create a gateway. I mean, I'd say it's that easy. That like all the developer has to do is pass in yellow, and we send them back the audit. Because by the way, again, back to the auditors are going to ask, why did you give this answer? It's either going to be because it's going to be an event, like in Air Canada, or they're just going to randomly pick, like they've done with changes, an answer from some, and then you're going to have to explain it. And you're going to need these tools as your audit record to explain it. Again, complexity, non-determinism. These are important things that you have to deal with. This is an uncertain world. You must deal with it. Sorry, I'm basically done. The one last thing I would do is back to the thing I said earlier. The paradox is you have to use evaluations to protect your brand. Risk, capital R risk. But at the same token, the token cost can get incredibly expensive.